we get started, can you guys hear me out there? Okay, good. As you can probably tell, I'm not from these parts. I'm from Bristol. I like that. At least I got a chuckle. I will take sympathy laughter throughout the whole presentation. No, I'm actually from Phoenix, Arizona, and was asked to come speak on behalf of Aconex, out here at this event. And I jumped at the opportunity because I think it's important for us as a company to get out and talk to folks like yourself, because there's a preconception, rightly so, about what Aconex does. Document management, that's what we've been doing for the last 15, 16 years. And in the last 7 months, we've actually brought to market a project control solution. Okay, I swear this is as salesy as my presentation is going to get. I don't have any presentation slides or sales slides. So in the last 6 or 7 months, we brought to market a project control solution, and that's my job, is to make sure it's successful globally. So it's really great to be out here speaking. I was at a similar event a couple of months down in Sydney, speaking there. So getting the word out, evangelizing the solutions we have is something that's my responsibility. But what I want to talk about today is not so much about product, okay? I'm not going to talk about that. That's actually reserved for the guys over in that technology showcase. What I want to talk about today are a couple of things, okay? One is the rise of what I'm calling, or what I'm seeing as these things called giga projects, okay? I won't claim to have coined that term myself, but when I Googled it, there wasn't a lot of that use of the word giga project out there. And to me, a giga project is something that is really just larger than a mega project. It's as simple as that, right? I mean, mega, giga. Come on, you people are smart, you get it. So, I mean, mega projects, depending on the definition, they're $1, $2, $3 billion. And I always like to say, I'm so old, I remember when $1 billion was a lot of money, because it used to be a boatload of money, $1 billion. But now we're seeing projects that are 8, 9, 10, 20, 30, 50, $100 billion projects over that life cycle of the project. And I've been thinking lately a lot about what that means for project controls and being able to manage projects of this size and this scale. And there's actually not a lot of research out there on this. There's a lot on mega projects, and there's starting to be a little bit more research on, McKinsey calls it ultra products. I think they call it. I have a quote in this presentation from them. So what I want to do is just explore sort of the rise of the giga project as kind of one part of this presentation, but then I want to take you on a journey. And I figure it's late enough in the day, you're a little bit tired, I'm standing between you and a drink, basically, or you and a panel, and I want to take you on a journey so you're mentally a little bit less defensive, and talk about an area of project controls that we don't really talk about that much. And it has nothing to do with technology, it has nothing to do with process, it's all about people, okay? But it's a different view of the people dimension. And I'll build up to that, but I just wanted to give you the heads up, that's what I'm going to be talking about. So, with that, and I'm used to having a monitor down here, so I hurt my neck looking up there. So, I want to talk about some of the goals we're trying to achieve in project controls. I'm not necessarily talking financial goals, I'm just talking about things that we're trying to get done as part of the business. This rise of complexity, some obvious challenges, but then that hidden challenge around that people dimension that I mentioned. And then, finally, how we move forward. Okay, just some, a list of 5 things we can do tomorrow to actually improve the way in which we're managing project controls. And if there's one takeaway from today I'd like you to go back to the office with, is maybe just saying, wow, that was an interesting concept. You may not agree with what I'm saying, you may entirely disagree, but maybe it'll have some effect on how you view project controls and the decisions you make, because what I'm talking about here, when I talk about the people side of things, is all around decision-making, accurate decision-making. So, we're trying to, I think, in project controls, do a lot of things. Yes, there is the deliver on time, deliver on budget, but it's simple things, right? What projects, have the most risk? How do we learn from projects that we've been doing time and time again. Really unlocking this type of information is really important to us as a project controls profession. You know, execution, you know, can project leaders, you know, focus on project delivery instead of trying to, you know, find where the information is and enable better collaboration? Can we actually focus on getting the work done, you know? A lot of people feel like they're starting a project over every time they start a new project, even though they have years and years of experience with it. That's part technological, it's part process, and it's part people. But I think these are some of the things that when we step back and look at our profession, this is really on a level what we're trying to achieve in project controls. But there's obviously inherent challenges. So the amount of capital spend being deployed to projects is growing naturally. In fact, since the global financial crisis, it's actually been accelerating quite a bit. And what you find is that of that roughly $10 trillion that's being spent every year on a number of projects, you know, some are what we call core infrastructure, other areas are obviously being invested in. What we're seeing is we're seeing a greater number of larger scale projects. Okay, this rise of this giga project, where we're getting out of the $2 and $3 billion range up into that 7, 8, 9 and beyond range. And a lot of that is being driven by countries like China, right? You know, when they invest in a project, they do it China size, you know, they do. It's got at least 9 zeros associated with it. And some projects even are approaching probably 12 zeros, $1 trillion over their lifetime. So what we're seeing an increase in capital spend globally, specifically on infrastructure, but we're also seeing a number of large projects evolving in a lot of places like China, Asia, the Middle East, because they're essentially nation building. They're building new cities. I think China over the next couple of years is going to build 175 new airports, or at least start on it, 175 airports. I mean, that's a massive project in and of itself. So we're starting to see these larger projects, you know, evolve, you know. And these ultra-large projects, as McKinsey calls them, are inherently more challenging, right? It kind of makes sense, right? As the numbers go up in terms of investment, the complexity goes up. There's more players involved, the ecosystem expands, you know, it just becomes more challenging. This list is a very short list of some of those larger projects out there. Some you may be familiar with, some you may not be. Funny enough, I was not familiar with the International Space Station. I don't typically think of that as being a project, but it's been said that over its lifetime, that'll be $1 trillion project, okay? So substantial amounts of money. As you can see, there's a high amount being spent in Asia, the Middle East, but you know, the UK, the US are all investing in some very, very capital-intensive projects, okay? And these take on different dimensions, okay? So what I have here is, fortunately, because we've been in the cloud since day one, we have a rich data set, so we can look out at all the projects that have been done on our platform and get a really good sense of how they're performing, you know, best practices, KPIs, et cetera, and create these great visuals of how a network grows over time as projects come online. So this network that you see building here over this, you know, roughly, you know, 4 or 5 year period, actually 6-year period, is airport projects in Asia Pacific, okay? Now that's a lot of different projects, and you could say, well, none of those are really giga projects. Yeah, but taken in total, they do end up being what we would consider a giga project. And I'll tell you the reason why, is because of those 170 or so projects going on at the airports, there's about, I think, upwards of 5,000 different organizations involved in that. And many of those organizations, whether they're subcontractors, contractors, or even owners in some case, are going to be involved on multiple projects. So all of a sudden, that $1 or $2 billion project you're working on, because you're working on 3 or 4 or 5 others, all of a sudden escalates into something a lot bigger than you initially started with. So it becomes a giga project, and you have to manage it accordingly. And networks are complex. Infrastructure projects are inherently complex and challenging. You know, those deep relationships are forged. And to some extent, they're fairly unstable, you know. Sort of a domino approach, right? If one or two elements go wrong, it can have a cascading effect. If one of those contractors goes out of business, it could have a substantial effect on a number of other projects throughout that network, okay? So it's important to recognize that even though you may be only working on a small project, elements of your organization at a portfolio level may be working on much larger, in the aggregate, a much larger project portfolio. But they present challenges, right? I don't have to reiterate this to you. You've probably seen it earlier today. I'm sure some folks did it. Cost overruns are causing problems. They have since, I think, the pyramids were built. You know, there's always been cost overruns or delays. Productivity is very challenging in this industry. We're trying to increase productivity through technology, among other things, through training, et cetera, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. And then the interesting thing that a lot of people don't focus on is if you happen to be a publicly traded company, traded on a market, have shares, it's been shown that you will take a share price hit if a project goes south in general, especially if you're in an asset-intensive industry like the utilities or oil and gas. If you fail to deliver a project on time and on budget, the average is about a 12% hit to your share price, which is significant if you're, you know, a Shell or a BP or someone like that. So there's serious consequences as a result of the complexity of these projects. So here's where I want to talk about and kind of shift gears now, setting the stage a little bit as to, you know, the backdrop, which you should all be familiar with. Is talk about the people, the process, and the technology. So let's start with technology. And these are all quotes from McKinsey, by the way. I didn't put that up there, but they're all McKinsey quotes. So we happen to be in the unenviable position of second to last, as you probably know, out of all industries when it comes to technology adoption, right? We're one above agriculture and mining, if you look at 20 different industries, which is pretty sad to say. So we've got low adoption of technology. Now, the good thing is, you can see a lot of technology here from a lot of different vendors, and I can tell you a lot of capital is being invested, venture capital in particular is being invested in the construction industry. So I think we're at a good point where we're starting to get more comfortable with technology. People are talking about the new the new generation that's coming into the business, and I think they have an expectation that their iPhones, their iPads will operate as they do in their personal lives and their business lives. And I think that's a big driver of technology adoption. Processes, obviously standardizing processes is important. You've got different people in different skill sets or different backgrounds that operate differently, but if you can configure the processes by way of the technology, by way of training, to address their challenges, to address what they're trying to do, obviously that's something that's going to be helpful. And then finally, people. The people aspect is an interesting one because traditionally we've thought about skill sets, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. We need to train people. You know, those new people coming in need to be trained, they need to be skilled, get them up to that experience level or as close as possible to those that are retiring, okay? And that's one way to definitely look at it, but I want to propose a different way, or not a different way necessarily, a complement, a different angle on that people argument. But before I do that, I just want to kind of lay this out. This is typically how we see, you know, Aconex, and I'm sure, you know, you guys see it as well, typically see the challenges, right? You've got technology which is being adopted, yes, but in a lot of cases is still pretty nascent in some companies. They still think they can run a $1 billion project on the back of a spreadsheet, which is always challenging. But you've got information silos, right? You've got disparate schedule information, disparate contract information, where's the change information, okay? So it's all disparate, and that presents its problems of its own. And then we've got processes that are broken, processes that may be manual in nature, shuffling around paper, you know, which is a function of technology to some extent, but it's also just taking existing processes and, in effect, digitizing them by leveraging the technology, okay? So if we can bring the silos together, fix the processes, we're in a pretty good spot. And typically, where we focus on people is actually we sort of throw people into this bucket in the broadest sense, right? We say, oh, we'll train them up on the technology, right? Which is great. They do need to be trained on the technology, absolutely. We'll improve their processes, we'll get some consultants in, improve their processes, But that, I think, is only part of the equation, okay? I think it's only part of the problem, and that is really that this is all skill-based that we're talking about, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I want to make a transition here to what I'm proposing here is something that we need to take a closer look at. And you've heard a little bit of it today. I've heard some people mention the concepts that I'm talking about. People in the risk business typically do mention it. Before I get into this part of the discussion or conversation or presentation, as I said, I was in Australia. I was actually presenting a Project Controls event, like I said, and I was talking to the Risk Engineering Society's leader down there for Australia, or for New South Wales. And this was a topic that really resonated with him, and he encouraged me to talk about it out here as I talked about it down in Australia. And this is the topic that I want to talk about, okay? It's really about decision making. Okay? It's not about process improvement necessarily, but it's about decision making. We have to make rapid decisions every day. Rapid decisions. Give me an answer now. Tell me the solution to the problem. Okay? The challenge is those cycle times seem to be getting more compressed, and I think that is a function of some of these bigger projects. Certainly the stakes are getting higher because of the dollar value involved in the projects, and when we get involved in these large projects, there's just not dollars and cents. There's political issues, there's social issues, there's environmental issues, and everybody these days has visibility into your project, okay? It's being covered somewhere, okay? The challenge is we have inherent biases that impact our decision making, and that's what I want to talk about over the next couple of minutes, are biases, cognitive biases that impact our decision making. And it's a subject that maybe unless you're in the risk space, that doesn't get talked about too often. And like I said, it was mentioned a couple of times today, I heard it. So just a little bit of background. And I've been reading about this subject for a number of years. I never thought it would apply that much to the real world or to my life in some cases. But as I've learned more about it, I've been able to reflect upon the way in which I make decisions. So I don't know how many of you know of or have heard of Danny Kahneman, okay? He's been around for a number of years. He actually won the Nobel Peace Prize in economics, and he's not an economist, okay? He's a psychologist, basically, and he studies human behavior. Him and a colleague, over the last 20, 30 years, have really challenged the assumption of the rational person, the rational man, right? Always making the best decisions for themselves and others. And it really goes against the grain of what conventional wisdom thinks, right? It's kind of, some of this stuff is counterintuitive. So they established an initial framework of some standard biases that we all have, and they've subsequently been expanded to a substantial amount, and I'll show you. But the problem is, in our business, when you make bad decisions, it adds up. Bad decisions in terms of deciding whether to go with a project, during a project, the decisions you make can add up to $1 trillion wasted, according to McKinsey. So this is in our DNA. So I don't care how old you are, what your racial background is, what your gender is, your education. This is the one thing that unifies us and makes us common, is that DNA inside of us all that has led us towards these biases, which were perfectly fine when we were running around, the plains of Africa, thousands of years ago. And initially, there were identified about 7 different biases, and frankly, these are the ones that I tend to talk about, the ones that I understand the most. But you'll see, over the last 20 or 30 years, there's a whole host of biases. I don't expect you to read that. There's not going to be a test or anything. But there's a number of cognitive biases that impact the way in which we act. Now, some are going to have an impact on our business, some won't. But it's interesting when you look at it, there's a need to act fast, and that there's things that impact our ability to do that. Not enough meaning, things are missing. I don't have the full picture, I don't have all the data, And sometimes too much information, right? Just information overload. So some of these you're probably very familiar with. I can say as a human being, I'm guilty of all 7 of them, okay? Confirmation bias is one of the most, I think, prevalent ones we have. And if you're working on a project, if you're doing research, if you're doing analysis, confirmation bias can sneak into things in that you're only going to be looking for information that supports your hypothesis, right? You're going to disregard, whether you consciously or unconsciously do it, things that go against what you believe in, okay? It's a confirmation bias. You want things to be confirmed for you. I've done it with research, I tend to look for things that are going to validate my point, right? You could even argue some of this is, right? I mean, there's bias in everything we do. Another one that I love, and this is what the risk guys really appreciate, is the overconfidence bias. And I know you've heard about this one. I'm sure you have. We, by nature, and I guess it's a good thing in some ways, are overconfident about our abilities, our capabilities, okay? So when we initially go into a project, how long is it going to take? It's going to take a year and cost, $1 million. 2 years later, we're still into the project, and it's now $5 million. It's an exaggeration, but I think we can all appreciate that a lot of times we are overconfident in what we expect things to take in terms of time and the amount of money involved in those decisions. The fatal attribution error, that's a great one. My kids often do that, and it's basically finger pointing. It's attributing errors to other people and not, being accountable. So my kids are always doing that, which I'm sure you can all relate to. So I think it's important to look at these and to understand them and start to include them sort of in our toolkit, if you will, our toolkit of ways in which we can improve that people element of the technology, process, and people. It's just not about training, and getting people spun up on new technology or necessarily about new processes. It's about, thinking about the decisions you make, And again, in this day and age, they're going to take on an order of magnitude greater than in the past. So this is sort of the re-imaged version here, if you will. So you've got potentially, disconnected silos of information, broken processes, and you've got, these biases. And one of the challenges is we need to take time to correct the biases, okay? Danny Kahneman and his colleagues, I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's 2 different systems. There's System 1 and System 2 that we operate on. System 1 is that I heard a rustling in the bush, and I got to run because it could be a lion, okay? That's an immediate, almost non-thinking action. Doesn't require a lot of mental gymnastics, if you will. Doesn't require a lot of calories, Sometimes that's good. Sometimes there will be a lion out there that you need to run away from. But most of the time in our modern world today, that's not very applicable. Certainly is in some cases, but not in most cases. System 2 is the one that is the more thoughtful, deep thinking that we operate on a deeper level. And that's where I think we need to spend more time, is thinking deeper about some of the decisions we're making. And unfortunately, we can't make them, okay? We can't make those deep decisions because we're scrambling to get information, because our systems are disconnected, our processes are broken, which gives us no time to make the thoughtful, deep connection to the problem we're trying to solve, okay? And, this is reality, right? This is the world we live in. We live in these relatively complex projects, whether it's a mega project or a giga project, right? This is an example of Denver International Airport. And this is only one small portion of Denver International Airport, right? The transportation hub and a hotel. The actual project was probably 5 or 6 times more than this. But when you look at this, you've got, 6 million tasks just for this one project, portion of this project, right? You've got 122,000 requests for information. Multiply that by 2, 3, 4, 5 times on a large mega giga project, and you start to see a level of complexity there that no human can really manage. So we rely on technology. But a lot of those decisions that we're going to make are going to have a huge cost impact, okay, schedule impact. So we have to think about them more deeply. And technology can do that. It can filter out, the 120,000 that are very rote, very simple to approve. Maybe AI, artificial intelligence, can do that for us. Certainly a lot of things we don't need to get involved with. But for that 5 or 10% that are critical, really major decisions, we have to have the time to be able to do that. Unless we have technology and good processes, we're not going to be given that time to do it. So these are, basically 5 biases, and these are the types of things that you can do to overcome them. And I'm sure this presentation will be made available. But like I said, the confirmation bias, the overconfidence bias, the fundamental attribution error, those are all pretty common. Anchoring's another good one. Marketers in retail use this a lot. You're probably familiar with it, where something will be advertised for 20 pounds and it will go on sale for 12 pounds. 20 pounds is an irrelevant number, right? It's just an arbitrary number in a lot of cases, but no matter how hard you try, that number is stuck in your head. Okay, and studies have proven this time and again, you can't get that 20-pound number out of your head. So you think you're getting a great deal. I'm saving 8 pounds. So all of these are pretty common. As you saw in that other chart, there's hundreds of them, but these are the ones that come up time and again. I thought they were the most applicable for the businesses that we're in, especially overconfidence and the confirmation bias. So challenge what you think, right? That's a common mantra that a lot of companies employ. In fact, our company employs that, really challenge what you think. Take the time to do it. And you can only have the time to challenge what you think, find the objective data, if you have the support of technology and processes that free you up to make those decisions that are of higher value. So I sort of view it like this. You bring the information silos together, you integrate them, you connect them, using technology, hopefully our technology. You improve your processes, get them digitized, get off paper, get some support from outside potentially. It makes information easy to get, right? It's at your fingertips now. All that contract information, all the change information, the dashboarding, the reporting, there it is, push of a button, near real time. And that allows me now to take the time to make the important decisions that truly can impact the success or the failure of a project. So that's really what I wanted to talk about, is just the rise of giga projects, the overwhelming amount of complexity in data, and this idea around taking the time to overcome some of these biases, which I don't think gets enough. Maybe you guys in the UK are talking about it, but I've been out here enough times to feel that it's not being talked about as much over here as it is in the US. It's not being talked about that much over there. To really think about how we can bring a higher level of cognitive horsepower, if you will, to the decision-making process. And this is called the case study session, so I did want to have one case study in here. I can't name the client because we're under an NDA with them. But they are building a very large manufacturing facility, as you can tell by the sheer amount of dollars involved. And they're looking to, if what I've been told is correct, possibly expand to another 15 or 20 of these. So all of a sudden, a very large facility, US $5 billion facility, becomes now potentially $100 billion if you got 20 of them, right? And they're suffering with the same problems that I've been talking about, right? This is a little bit more nuts and bolts up here, some of the stuff you would expect, but they certainly weren't getting the information that they needed out of their existing systems. They were suffering with the same problems of reporting that we all tend to suffer with, getting the information out, getting management aware of where they were on their $5 billion project, which is very important. And obviously being able to get them to that point quickly, efficiently, at a good cost, is something that they're going to take advantage of now, not just in their day-to-day project management, but in some of these areas that I've been talking about. They now have the time to think about, some of these big decisions, and these are big decisions on these projects, So, like most companies, they'll get the financial benefit, they'll reduce their risk, and they'll get those operational improvements, And this is one thing I've been talking to them about, is about, thinking through those cognitive biases, because again, we all bring them to the table. So just a couple of key takeaways, and this is my next to last slide. So 5 ways to minimize complexity. Obviously, like I said, getting all the information together, you've heard that from everybody. That's pretty straightforward, But a lot of us aren't doing it. We'll have Excel spreadsheets, we'll have cobbled together homegrown applications, someone will manage something one way, someone another way. And when we get involved in these large projects, we just can't do that. It just does not make sense. We'll expose ourselves to risk if we're a publicly traded company, or expose ourselves to a severe decline in our market cap, if that's the case. And the regulators aren't going to, stand for those types of shenanigans. And in fact, a lot of them nowadays do require a certain amount of rigor around, the technology that's being used on their large public projects. So, single sources of truth. I think connecting schedule and cost, not to spend too much time on that. Obviously, cost is one thing, but when you marry it up to schedule, you get that time element, which is very important, obviously, to manage the project and the progression of the project. Third element, flexible and scalable systems. I often revert to the discussion around Excel, right? Because Excel is still used in a lot of cases. I know it's used on projects here, it's used in the States, Asia is rampant with it, but you can't really scale up on it. Forget about the error-prone nature of it and the challenge of even collaborating on it. It's just simply not scalable. And because we're going to be taking on larger projects, if history is any indication, we need to have scalable systems that can flex up and flex down when need be. Change is the number one thing I think that we all struggle with, and certainly we can't manage that through archaic technology. And change is all about collaboration as well. So having that collaboration, that ability to bring on board your ecosystem, like I showed earlier, contractors, subcontractors, owners, upwards of 5,000 different organizations all collaborating. Some collaborating with each other, some collaborating with many, some collaborating with only a few, but you've got the platform in order to enable that collaboration, which makes change so much more effective. And then finally, kind of ending on the point that I wanted to emphasize, is decision making. And I know this may seem odd on the list, but it really, at the end of the day, decisions have to be made above all else. Someone has to decide to do this or that. And I think technology helps, processes help, but certainly being able to take the time to thoughtfully think through certain types of decisions that have a significant impact on your project is important, rather than going with your gut. Gut is okay at sometimes, but in a lot of cases, I think as these projects grow in complexity, we're going to see that that is really not the way to go, and that we have to take the time to make the right decision and really address those cognitive biases. So with that, hopefully that wasn't too much of a heavy subject. We do have a room where you can go drink if you so desire, and we have some champagne. So please, by all means, visit us up there. But hopefully that just shed a little light on a subject that really isn't talked about. I know it's probably a little bit different, so think about it. Tomorrow maybe you can start thinking about the things that you're doing out there in your business. And if there's time for questions, I don't know if there are, or if there's any interest in having any questions, I'm happy to answer some, and I'll be around anyway all night. Okay? Thanks very much.
On your presentation there, the project you showed the setup time for it was done in 4 weeks.
Yes.
Can you elaborate what allowed that speed of setup for a large project?
I'm thinking how to answer that, because the company I used to work at, I used to work at Oracle Primavera. Okay, so I've been over at Aconex for about a year now. I have a lot of good friends over at Oracle, by the way, who I like and have a good time with. One of the things that got me excited about Aconex is the deployment time of the Project Controls solution. I think a lot of what I would call the legacy technology out there that has historically been on-prem and they're trying to transition to the cloud hasn't been built in such a way that allows it to be deployed quickly. Customization is typically required, so you'll get involved in an implementation. In 6, 9, 12 months, you'll still be going through that implementation because you basically need to customize the product for your needs and your business. The thing that we have done with our Project Controls is make it highly configurable, okay? So you as an end user and admin can configure it to the needs, to the way you need it, And I just want to stress this product, it's been around in market for about 6 months now, but we actually purchased the IP from Ares Corporation. You might have been familiar with the product, it was called Worksite. We call it Connected Cost, we re-platformed it. But the reason they were able to get up in 4 weeks was simply that. I mean, they're very smart people at this place. I almost let the name slip. They're very smart people at this place. So there is a maturity level there, which does help, certainly the institutional knowledge. But the fact that it was just configurable, you can log on tomorrow. I could give you your log-on credentials today if you want. You could log on tomorrow and get going right away. And it's very intuitive and easy to use. We just had another client who I can mention. This is a transportation client, actually where I live in Phoenix, Arizona, called Valley Metro. They manage the whole public transportation, buses, light rail, things like that. They went live in about 3 weeks, okay? I would say their level of maturity is decent, decent level of maturity. And they've got a portfolio of just under $1 billion on projects that they're going to be working on over the next 5 or 6 years. So, ease of use, intuitiveness are definitely helpful, but just outright configuration versus customization. There's no custom code, it's a cloud solution. That's what makes it quick and easy to deploy. Yeah, thanks.
On a similar thing, on the slide you put up, on the left-hand side it said that there were many different systems that they were working with, and the solution was to come together in one system, and they did that in 4 weeks. That's not even a monthly cycle. What on earth did they use that they got all those systems working together on one system in 4 weeks?
Right. Well, they have, in terms of what they were using prior to using our solution, they were using Excel, okay? I think they might have been using a bit of a competitive product as well. Sorry, I'm just trying to avoid the light here. I feel like I'm in the spotlight. Yeah, so they're using Excel. They have a homegrown ERP system. Well, I've never heard of it, so it might as well be homegrown. And they're using P6, okay? So those were really the systems that they were really using at the end of the day. So we have out-of-the-box integration with P6, so that was a no-brainer. That was a piece of cake to do, right? Getting them off Excel was relatively easy because we have that look and feel, in the cost worksheet. It's very similar to Excel, very familiar. And integration to their ERP system is something that we're working on actual formal API integration right now, but right now they're fine with import-export facility, just importing and exporting it. So being able to, and there are some other systems, I think some estimating tools they were using as well that we also provided some integration with. So they weren't using a lot to begin with. This is a very new, innovative company, so they didn't necessarily have that legacy of like 30 different products, 20 different instances. So it was a little bit easier in that case, I will admit. But despite that, or in spite of that, it still is a pretty quick turnaround time in terms of getting this deployed. Yeah, that's it, yeah. Going once, going twice. Let's go have a drink.